Hi everyone, I'm Lynette Schaefer, and in this video, I'm going to discuss how we see light and common terms in the lighting industry. So about 23 years ago, I was told that a light bulb, yep, this little guy right here is not actually a light bulb. It should be referred to as a lamp. So keep that in mind. If there's one other thing to remember out of this training, just don't say light bulb, say lamp. And at any rate, there are obviously traditional lamps and there are also LED lamps. And in today's training, we are going to learn the difference between the two of those. Similarly, there are also fixtures. Some people may refer to these as luminaires. For purposes of this training, I'm going to probably be using the word fixture more often, but don't be mistaken. If you're ever doing, say, like a job takeoff where there might have furniture on the blueprints, those are also referred to as fixtures. So if you really want to use the right word, luminaire is probably the best term to use. At any rate, some fixtures use traditional lamps. Some, of course, use LED lamps, and some fixtures have LED light sources integrated within them. Now, as you can imagine, lamps and fixtures come in many different sizes, shapes, and they obviously have evolved since 1879. So artificial light sources date all the way back to, yes, 1879, when Thomas Edison created the first incandescent lamp. Now, this is actually quite impressive because it's still a lamp that's still used today, which is amazing. Now, additionally, light sources such as mercury vapor, low pressure sodium, and fluorescence made their first appearance in 1930s. Now, of course, technology started to be refined in the 70s and 80s. And then in the 90s is when we started to really see the LEDs kind of take off and actually be used as a real light source. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at this timeline, LED is the first true light source that isn't enclosed in a glass envelope, which opens the door for a lot more flexibility. So before we dig into these different light sources, it's important to understand how we see light and also understand some common terms. So let's get started with the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, since light is a wave, we refer to this spectrum to help us understand light. As you can see here, that light is a very small sliver of the spectrum. Of course, you have on the one side broadband and radio waves. And then, of course, those are the longest wavelengths, but lowest frequency. Now, of course, radio waves are followed by then microwaves, and not microwaves, but microwaves. And they produce more energy due to shorter wavelengths and higher frequency. Of course, phones, EPS, and of course, microwave ovens all use microwaves. Then there's, of course, infrared light, like sunlight. Of course, we can't see it, but we can definitely feel it. Then, of course, we get into the little bitty tiny sliver that's visible light. And this is the part that consists of red, which is a low frequency, and the longest wavelength, followed by orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. Now, the further you get away from red, the higher the frequency, but the shorter the wavelengths. Of course, after you get past all this visible light, then there are UV rays. There's, of course, X-rays, and there's gamma rays and cosmic rays. But we're really concerned about the little tiny sliver that we can see, which we refer to as visible light. So now that we know that light is not the only wave we can experience, it just happens to be the only wave that our eye can actually detect. The interesting thing is, as you see here, we're missing certain colors of light, right? So for instance, pink isn't represented here, right? Neither is white, which is the most common type of light that we see. This is because we have to mix wavelengths together to achieve certain colors. Now, light does not mix the same way that you may be familiar with. Now, typically, when you mix colors using paint, you are using what we refer to as a subtractive color method. The primary colors of light, of course, are RGB, red, green, and blue. If you subtract these from white, you get these three colors that you see on the screen. Now, mixing these primary colors generates black. So for any of those of you who have painted as a kid and remember mixing a bunch of colors together, they tend to get darker and darker and darker, and eventually they all just end up as black, right? So if you also have ever bought paint or picked out paint for a room, you may have noticed that this little color wheel, which you see on the lower left-hand corner, is a little different from the actual color wheel that we deal with from light. So as you see popped up on the right-hand side of this slide, when you mix red, green, and blue light, you actually get white light. So red, green, and blue, RGB, is referred to as the primary colors of light, and mixing the colors generates new colors, as you can see on the lower right-hand corner, that specific color wheel. This whole method is actually called an additive color versus subtractive. As more colors are added, the result becomes lighter, heading towards more of a white color. RGB is used to generate color on like our computer screens and our TV screens, and also any type of colored electronic display devices for that matter. Now, the lighting color wheel translates into something called the chromaticity diagram. The chromaticity diagram basically shows us hue and saturation of light and human color perception. Now you're going to notice that there are basically, again, those three primary colors of light at each of the three corners. You've got red, green, and blue, RGB, right? And as you move towards the center, you can see how they mix to create different colors of light. Now this black line that you see in the middle is actually called a black body locus, or a black body curve. And that is where forms of white light fall. And this is also where color temperature, or CCT, correlated color temperature, comes into play. All light sources have a CCT. Now, in general, if the light source has more of a red, say more the warmer appearance, the light output or the apparent color of that lamp is going to be, say, 2700 K. And typically we refer to this as warm white. The more blue content that a light source has, the cooler the apparent color is. And we typically say that's like 5000 K or higher. Some people may actually even refer to this as daylight. Now, sources that have 4000 K or 4000 CCT are usually referred to as cool white. So as a recap, you have white, or warm white, I should say. That's usually around 27 to 3000 K. Cool white, which is usually around 4000 K, and then daylight, which is usually above 5000 K. As I mentioned, all light sources have a CCT associated with them. Now, correlated color temperature is based on a scale that ranges from around 2000 to 10,000 degrees Kelvin. Individual light sources naturally emit light in different color temperatures, but some, such as fluorescent and LEDs, can be manufactured to emit almost any color temperature that you want. Now, when you actually think about the unit, the Kelvin temperature unit, actually it has nothing to do with temperature that the source runs at all. Instead, it's basically about the appearance of the light. Now, many people confuse the scale and think that the bluish or cooler light is lower color temperature because we normally associate the color blue with cold. But these are actually arranged to represent a flame where the hottest part of the flame really burns a blue or a white color. Now, let me show you an example of what it means to move along the black body curve. As you look at this image here, you can see we start at what, 2000 Kelvin, and we jumped up to 10,000 Kelvin. You can see how the pillows and the background look very much different. If you take it down to 2700 K, you again get more of that warm color appearance. If we jump it up to say 5000 K, you get more of that cool, or what some people refer to as daylight color. You continue to work your way along the black body curve to make the colors look differently. Now, as you saw in the video, changing the color temperature of a lamp can change the look and can drastically change the mood and the atmosphere of an application, of a space. So picking the correct color temperature for the space is really actually pretty critical. So for instance, you wouldn't want to put a 2700 K warm white light or lamp in, say, an operating room, right? You want that nice and bright. And although people do like that really white bluish light because it may make the space feel like you can see better and it's brighter, it's actually not recommended to put 5000 K in your home. Kind of the same principle as why a lot of cell phones now are set to go down to a warmer color at night. The warmer color makes people feel a little bit more calming, a little bit more cozy, and it makes people a little bit more relaxed. So you want to be very careful when you are specifying a lamp or a fixture, any type of lamp, any type of fixture. You've got to make sure that you are picking out the right CCT, correlated color temperature, for that specific application. Now, another important term in lighting is CRI, and it stands for Color Rendering Index. Now, CRI tells us how accurately an object will be rendered under a light source. So for instance, if you look at these two photos here, the CCT is exactly the same, but on the photo to the left, it is actually 100 CRI. Okay, so the CCT is the same, but the one on the left has 100 CRI, and the one on the right comes in about 80 CRI. Now, you may not be able to totally see this, but if you look real hard, the one on the left, if you look at the green, it's going to appear more green. And the one on the left is probably going to appear more bright and vibrant and more like a true red, bright color, right? So this is another example here. So CRI is based on a scale from 0 to 100, 100 being the absolute best. So when you look at these apples, say under 70 CRI, it doesn't look nearly as red as it would if you put it underneath a lamp source that had 100 CRI. Now, let me go a little bit further with this. If you've ever found yourself buying, say, a shirt at a store, you get it home and the color looks different. It could very well be that you bought it under a high CRI lamp, because a lot of retailers will increase the CRI of lamps to make the colors pop. Well, of course, when you get it home, you may not have that exact same type of lamp. Maybe you have a fluorescent lamp, for instance. And then all of a sudden you realize that that bright red that you thought was bright red is no longer bright red. Or if you've ever also had like a black pair of socks or a blue pair of socks, you can't see the difference between them. So what do? You walk over to the window and you're like, I can finally see which one's black and which one's brown. The reason for that is because daylight actually has the highest CRI, which comes in at 100. So how do you know the CRI and the CCT of a specific light source, or more importantly, of a specific SKU? Because honestly, every product nowadays, especially with LEDs, you can specify your CCT and you can sometimes specify your CRI. Now, you can, of course, go to the spec sheet. That's probably the best part to go. But in most cases, you can actually just look at the part number. So here's a couple of examples of different manufacturers' part numbers. This one here is a fluorescent lamp. And you can see here, the 8 stands for 80-ish, usually it's like 83 or 87 CRI, and the 41 stands for 4100 Kelvin. Another example, this is a T5HO LED lamp. This one here says 835, so you know it's in the 80-ish CRI range, and you know it's 3500 Kelvin. Another example, this one here is an LED fixture. In this particular case, this manufacturer actually does a pretty good job of clearly explaining what the color temperature is, and the CRI, in this case, is 4070 CRI. And then there's this last one, and this is an LED replacement HID. Now you're going to notice on this last part number, there's FCCT listed instead of a color temperature. The reason for this is because products nowadays have something that is called selectable technology, where the contractor can, or the installer can choose the color temperature upon install. And you do that by just locating little switches either on the lamp or the back of the fixture. The same type of technology is also available when you have to select your wattage. But for right now, we're speaking specifically about CCT. It's really simple and easy to select your color temperature at the project on install. And if you want to change it at a later date, it makes it pretty easy to do that too. So again, this is done by locating switches on the back of the fixture. Sometimes they're also on the side of the lamp, or sometimes they're even on the driver. Here are some examples of what those switches actually look like. This one here with the two kind of lower left-hand corner. This one here with the two blue switches happens to have both CCT selectable and wattage selectable. Now, some products will have select SKUs that will feature up to 5 different CCT selections, and in some cases, maybe just as many wattage selections. Of course, the CTC selections can range from 2700K, 3000, 3500, 4000, even 5000 Kelvin. Now, keep in mind, with this type of technology, there's no need for Wi-Fi, there's no special wiring, there's no apps, it's just all in the fixture, and it's just right there to make it very easy for your customers. Now, this type of selectable technology, of course, allows for fewer SKUs to be stocked, more flexibility for the installer, and of course, customization for the end user too. So all really great things and awesome technology. So now that you know what CRI and CCT is, let's move into how we actually see color and how we see light. Now, it's a bit strange, but we never actually truly see light. I know, it took me a while to understand that too. We actually only see reflected light. And to truly see the color of an object, the color must be present in the light source. So let's light up this room with an incandescent lamp, okay? You can see everything really clearly. You can see the reds, the greens, the blues, you see all of it. And the reason for that is because an incandescent light source consists of all the colors in the spectrum. Now, if you turn off that light source, You can't see any colors because there's no light source lighting the room. So everything just appears completely black, right? Here's another example. If I use an incandescent lamp to light up this red apple, most of the colors will be absorbed and only the red light bounces off the apple. That is why our eye sees it as red. Now, if you were to light this red apple up with a blue light, if they still make those, that used to be a thing at one point. Anyways, you light it up with a blue light that only consists of blue waves, it will make the apple appear black because the apple is absorbing all the light and not reflecting any of it because there's no blue in an apple, right? So that's the reason why you have to make sure that whatever you're lighting has the right spectrum to be able to light up the space the way you want it to light up. Now, in order to perceive a color, the source must produce and the object must reflect the color. So in the example with the apples or the apple, apples don't have any blue, right? We know that apples aren't blue. So that's why the apple shows us black underneath a blue light. In this example that you see here, all the beautiful fall colors are showing on this really bright sunny day because according to the spectral power distribution chart for sunlight, sunlight contains all colors of the spectrum. Now, this shows the spectrum power distribution curves of various light sources. Now, remember, the light source illuminating any object is really what determines what you see. The only way we know what wavelengths exist in a light source is by looking at the spectral power distribution curve. So incandescence, as you see here, includes all the colors of the spectrum. But looking at these charts, what creates even more vibrant colors than the classic incandescent? Well, if you said daylight, daylight spectrum, which makes sense because colors just seem to pop in the natural daylight. Now, with fluorescence, you can see the various spikes of colors, but there are a lot of gaps. So when you look at like the red, for instance, or the red end of the spectrum for fluorescence, and even though it contains most colors, it doesn't show a wide variety of each color. So red doesn't look too bad, but then you have these peaks of green. Well, you may not be able to see the difference between, say, green grass and lime green, right? You're going to have a hard time distinguishing that because it's just a spike. Same with the red, same with the green. And lastly, when you look at an LED light source, which has maybe a larger pump of blue, but a relatively full spectrum, that's why if you ever go out driving, especially years ago when LEDs first came to market, when people changed out their headlights to LEDs, they gave off that kind of that blue hint. Well, naturally, LEDs just have a little bit more blue than other light sources, and that's why they kind of gave off that little bit of a yellow or more of a blue light. So you can see how widely our surroundings can vary just because of the light source we used. We've got to make sure we use the right light source with the right CCT, the right spectrums, and the right CRI to be able to light the space properly. So let me give you one other example because this is starting to become a more popular topic. So grow lights or horticulture lights are of course becoming more popular. If you ever see these types of light sources, they don't actually produce white light. The reason for this is because red and blue wavelengths are important for plant growth. Most LED horticulture light sources contain red and blue diodes only. So this means that their light is going to be more pinkish or purplish depending upon the red and the blue mix, because red and blue, of course, equals purple. So in this particular example right here, there happens to be a little bit more blue than red. So that's why you can see the blue color in the background versus the red, and the rest of the colors are all washed out. So very interesting how that works. So besides CRI and CCT, all light sources produce lumens. Lumens is basically the amount of light coming out of the source, also known as luminous flux. While candela is the luminous intensity, basically the intensity of the beam, so the amount of light going in a certain direction. And then illuminance is the amount of light actually arriving on the surface, which is something that can be measured and typically is measured in foot candles. The way you do this is you would typically go out and buy a foot candle reader. Now, luminance is the apparent brightness, how bright an object appears to the human eye. So you can see how the lumens out of a light source doesn't actually all, one, hit the ground, two, they're all not reflective, and three, you've got to make sure that you are designing the space for the proper lumens in order to achieve the light output, the foot candle level that you need for the space. We'll talk a little bit more about that in lighting design considerations. Now, as you can imagine, different light sources produce various number of lumens. As a matter of fact, one manufacturer's lamp doesn't always have the same lumens as another manufacturer's exact same lamp, okay? Because every lamp, you make, it's a replacement for a 400 watt HID, or it's a replacement for a T8 lamp. Well, all lumens, again, let me say that one more time, lumens from one manufacturer can vary from another. So for instance, take this LED corn cob, okay? Manufacturer A comes in at 18 watts, 2,300 lumens, while manufacturer B offers a selectable wattage choice. And it just so happens that the 18 watt, if you select 18 watts, produces 2,610 lumens, which comes in at 145 lumens per watt. Manufacturers spend a lot of time trying to develop products that can produce the right amount of lumens using just the right amount of watts to produce an efficient light source. And this is basically referred to as efficacy. So efficacy is basically lumens per watt, or LPW, and it measures how efficient a light source is. So think of it miles per gallon, kind of the same similar thought. Higher lumens per watt is more efficient, just like cars that allow you to drive more miles per gallon. Now, lumens per watt is determined by taking the lumens of the lamp or the fixture and dividing it by the number of watts. Some LEDs have lumen per watt ratings over 200, which is pretty incredible, making them super efficient. Now, many products need to meet certain lumens per watt in order to be approved by, say, Energy Star or DLC, which you'll learn about that very soon. As you can see in this chart, traditional incandescent lamp sources are very inefficient. As a matter of fact, they only achieve about 20 or so lumens per watt, while most LEDs are super efficient. And most of these LEDs can range from 100 all the way up to 160, especially when you look at an LED fixture that has the LED integrated. Sometimes on replacement lamps, you may not see quite as high lumens per watt, but it's something to kind of keep in mind. So as a recap, all light sources produce color temperature, right? CCT. All light sources also have a CRI rating based on a scale from 0 to 100. All light sources produce lumens, and all light sources use energy to produce light, which we refer to as watts. Thank you. And if you would like a course completion certificate, please email me. Please note there are 2 N's in Lynette. Thank you.